All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and for being here for that second Good Chat. So, just quickly, the Good Chat is a monthly 1 hour conversation hosted by Tribute or the Tribute team on current affairs like fashion, history, music, photography, and everything else that happens in DC mostly. Because of COVID, we can't anymore be together in our space and kind of have the salon that we used to have. So we had to recreate it online. Uh, and yeah, it's our best option now. So today's talk is about fashion studies. And I'm very honored and happy to have with me three of my old peers or MA in fashion studies at Parsons, and one future candidate of that MA. Um, Fashion studies is a relatively new field of studies, uh, and one that is at the heart of everything that we do at Tribute, and in parallel or even hand in hand with the retail. We believe that fashion is multi-layered, and we try as much as we can to convey this multi-layered uh, this multi-layerism to our community, not only through our buying process or our merchandise, but mostly through our programming or everything else that we do within our space and even online. So before we start that conversation, I would like to invite our speakers to introduce themselves briefly. So Anthony, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Anthony Polyperamble Jr. I'm originally from the DC metro area. I'm currently located in Bowie, Maryland, where I've been quarantining for 13 weeks, I guess, is what we're at right now. Um, my background is originally in the visual arts. I went to the University of Maryland where I studied studio art and art history. And I was I was working with an art gallery in DC for quite some time until I moved to New York in 2015 to begin the MA Fashion Studies program at Parsons. While I was a student at Parsons, I did my research basically around ideas of gender, art, technology, luxury, and class within the fashion system. My thesis research was on flower beards, decorated beards, and how it relates to the idea of masculinity and gender as it's displayed on social media. Since I've graduated from the MA program in 2017, I have been teaching at Parsons. I'm a part-time faculty member there currently. I teach research courses to undergrads, first year studio and seminar courses. I've also taught history of fashion and introduction to fashion studies, as well as fashion cultures, which is the first year MA course as well. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you for having me, Joelle.
Thank you for being with us. Michelle?
I was like, Anthony, you got that down.
I have notes.
I'll try and remember to cover everything. I'm Michelle McVicker. I'm the Collections and Education Assistant at the Museum at FIT. I'm from Chicago, and before I started the Parsons program, I had had a few internship experiences at different museums, not necessarily anything costume related. So I was always interested in museums, you know, just as an institution, but I didn't quite know how I wanted to engage with them. It was usually in the education department. I did grow up thrifting with my mom, and it was before it was cool. So I always tell, especially when I interact with students, that that was my first form of material knowledge, was just sifting through racks and feeling like a cashmere sweater when someone's washed it in the machine instead of dry cleaned it. Those types of things, you know, poly, etc. And so I did my undergrad at a liberal arts college because I got a full ride and I just tried to make the best of it. I took a couple of costume design courses and worked in the costume shop in the theater department. And then a professor of mine recommended the Parsons program, and I applied and moved in 2014. And then before my second semester of the second year, so when you're supposed to write your thesis, I was hired as a collections management assistant at the Costume Institute at the Met. So I put my thesis on hold for a year and completed the 1-year contract. And it was the year of Manus Ex Machina, which was very cool to be there. And Laura, we overlapped for a bit too, so that was nice. And then I decided I had had enough of New York, to be honest, and I moved back home. I finished my thesis remotely. And after that, I had a couple of fellowships. So one at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, and then another one in Cultural Heritage at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of American History. And then as of November 2018, I've been in my current position at the museum. And I can talk a bit more about what that position entails later.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Laura?
Hi, Joelle, and everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. This is wonderful. It's wonderful to see you all in a different place, I guess, in a different time, and see just getting together to discuss something that we clearly all love. So I'm a PhD student candidate right now. I'm in the dissertation writing process. I research officially, I research colonial Latin American fashion, but I am also very much interested in contemporary Latin American fashion and just like fashion through the Americas. And I guess its relationship to Europe too. So that's what I do now. But it all started, I think, when I was an undergrad. I majored in economics because I wanted to be an art historian, but there were no art history programs back in Colombia, and I couldn't afford to move abroad at the time. So I just decided to, choose something that I was interested in, and economics, and most specifically economic history, ended up being my way. And when we started taking the advanced seminars, I took one in the history of industrialization. And that's when I started getting into fashion as a research subject. And my professor, the one that was teaching that class, he actually encouraged me to continue pushing the boundaries of economic history and to continue studying fashion. He actually introduced me to Valerie Steele, which I think is very interesting, or to the work of Valerie Steele, which I think is interesting because he's this older, white male economic historian telling me about Valerie Steele's fabulous work on corsets. So it's kind of funny. But he pushed me to continue exploring the topic of fashion and to eventually pursue the master's in fashion studies at Parsons. And then in Parsons, I started exploring Latin American fashion, particularly Colombian fashion in the 19th century and its relationship with politics and with the process of nation building at the time. And then I had so many unanswered questions that I think I knew as soon as we graduated that I wanted to continue exploring them and apply for a PhD. But in between the master's and the PhD, as Michelle mentioned, we overlapped at the Met. I was a research assistant for the curator of drawings and prints for design and architecture, and that included a lot of fashion. So I did get to see a lot of beautiful objects there and just work with them, and that was very inspiring. And I think that's what motivated me to keep studying fashion through a sort of art historical lens, but without really forgetting all of the economics background that I have.
Thanks, Laura. Emilia?
I'm so honored to be part of this group. Thank you so much for including me. You're both, all of you, awing me. My name is Emilia. I am not an alum of the program. I was admitted this spring, and I'm looking forward to starting sometime soon. I'm currently unsure of whether or not I'll be starting in the fall or I'll be deferring. I did apply before the world turned 180 degrees upside down. So I'm looking forward to working out the logistics, and the program has been really supportive. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, I'm a researcher. I'm an author of a book that was published in 2017. I am the founder of a sustainable fashion magazine based here in DC. But my story actually really begins almost 100 years ago with my great-grandfather's business. He owned a leather dyeing factory called a conceria on the Bay of Naples in Italy. And he and his entire family were garment industry workers. When they immigrated to the United States, they experienced a lot of negative transitions, earning a working wage instead of earning a living wage, and a lot of chemical poisoning where they tried to recreate their craft. So learning about my family's history is what inspired me to transition into sustainable fashion. In 2019, the mayor here in DC appointed me as DC Commissioner for Fashion Arts and Events. I teach an undergraduate class at Georgetown in fashion journalism, and in addition to sort of writing and researching about fashion, I am sort of a private editorial consultant for major American magazines. My sort of interest in what I wrote about in my admission statement at Parsons is very much focused on the study of fashion and ethics. And that doesn't just come from a point of environmentalism or human rights concerns. It actually comes from a sort of classic Greek understanding of Aristotelian ethics. What is the ethics system behind the people in the fashion community around the world? And what values make up that ethics system? And if there is such a thing as good, for instance, we're on the good chat right now, what in fashion ethics is defined as evil? And are we at a point yet where we can actually reckon with the transitions that are not good?
Mhm.
Thanks, Emilia. I mean, I'm excited to have you all here. It's such a beautiful group of people, and I'm just going to give a little bit of context. Why did I decide to put all of you together, and also, a little bit of background on myself. So I'm Joelle. I am the co-founder and CEO of Tribute, and I'm an independent researcher and curator based in Washington, D.C. I'm also an alumni of the MA in Fashion Study program, graduated in 2016. My research interests span from fashion photography to non-Western fashion and sustainability. I did write my thesis on the on the pornification of the fashion editorial, because in the past life, before how I started my career in fashion was as a stylist working with photographer for a women's magazine. I studied politics, so I think I was always interested in disruption and how to, asking a lot of questions and, always questioning things. So when I ended up moving from politics to fashion, it was obvious for me that it was not only going to be about dressing up people and talking about trends. I wanted to learn more. And so that's why I applied for the MA in Fashion Studies, actually. I discovered the world of sustainable fashion when I moved to Vietnam, where I was working with local designers, and I saw, I saw what everyone was talking about at the time, what happened in the factory, what happened with the water in the river, especially in Cambodia. When I traveled to Cambodia, what happened with the secondhand market in that region. And so for me, it basically that's, my interest in fashion grew, but again, more and more from a intellectual or cultural and historical point of view than just a business and an industry. I was actually completely rejecting the industry, which is very ironic because now I am back in the industry. So yes, after I graduated from Parsons, I moved to DC because my partner lives in DC. And I worked for the Textile Museum on one exhibition. And then I decided that I saw an opportunity in DC that I could create my own platform and, kind of express what I want to express through fashion, through my own platform, and inspire other people to do that, and build a community of people in DC that were interested also in fashion, but in the good fashion, as Emilia said. That's actually how I met Emilia. And yes, I wanted to bring us together today because, you know, the work that we have been doing at Tribute, again, bringing young designers, responsible designers to DC, but also building and elevating that fashion talk, building that community where we come together as professors, researchers, archivists, museum professionals, PhD candidates, journalists, etc., to kind of also discuss, the field of fashion outside, again, of what what is a common, I would say, understanding of what fashion is. So to kick off, I just want to read that definition, the definition of Parsons and the MA in Fashion Studies. So this is how Parsons described the program. In the groundbreaking interdisciplinary Master of Art in Fashion Study program, students develop a critical and historical understanding of fashion and its complex interactions with identities and culture. MA Fashion Studies investigate the material and visual dimension of fashion as dress, image, and bodily practice, and as a major cultural industry that positions the individual within society and the world. So for me, and I think for all of us, fashion studies is interdisciplinary. It comprises object-based studies, fashion practices, ethnography, sociology, anthropology, film, culture study, and I think even more than that. And it includes fashion historians, fashion archivists, conservators, librarians, curators, writers, and researchers, professors, consultants, and even today, fashion designers. So I want to know from Anthony, Michelle, and Laura, why did you decide to choose that MA? And, what were your expectations, and, what did you get out of it?
I can start if you want.
Yeah, Laura?
Okay. Well, I think I told you a little bit about it earlier, but I was just interested in fashion. I think originally, or like maybe more academically, as a motor for the economy. Fashion just like pushes the economy, and it sometimes just defines the economy of an entire country. And I think that was always interesting to me. But then also when I started thinking a little bit more about fashion and the power of fashion, I also realized that it has very strong social meanings, and of course there's an aesthetic meaning too. It's a big part of the culture in different parts of the world too. So I think I started being attracted to fashion as a more kind of like comprehensive phenomenon, that again, it can be studied from different fields. And I remember when I was thinking for the first time about applying to grad school and maybe exploring fashion a little bit more, one of the big questions for me was like, okay, so do I go to grad school in economics, or do I go to grad school in anthropology or sociology, or I have no clue where to start? And then that's when I found the MA in Fashion Studies, and I realized that actually my questions in a way were valid, because you can indeed approach fashion from all of these different perspectives. But then I think what appealed to me the most about this program is that it actually attempts to bring these different fields together and teach you methods and ways of studying by not just looking at fashion from these different perspectives, but by bringing them together. And I think I always appreciated that. And now, even years after graduating from the program, I think that's still one of the things that I think makes us the most maybe well equipped as researchers?
Yeah, I think you touched on something quite important, and you don't have to come from fashion to actually go into an MA in fashion studies, right? And I think that's the beauty of it, and that's what, you know, that's what makes it so special. It's you know, we had lawyers with us in our programs, and they still, you know, they a lot of them went on to continue to do a PhD. So yeah, it's, I think that richness is important in that program.
For me, I found fashion studies, or I guess the introduction to the idea of fashion studies came to me after I began taking art history courses at the University of Maryland, because I was analyzing artwork in a way that I hadn't done previously, and there was a little part of me while I was an undergrad that was like, oh well, I think there's a way to look at clothing in the same way. And I first heard about this program when it launched in 2010, which is when I graduated from my undergrad. And I didn't apply then. It didn't seem like the right time. But it was like in the 5 years that eclipsed between me, you know, hearing about the program and then finally joining, that I realized that it's more than just the history too. It is, as you said, Laura, this like social connection as well. And that clothing isn't just clothing, and I hate to use that term, just clothing, but that there is a deeper meaning to it, and it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't just connect to the business side of things. It doesn't just connect to race, but it also connects to ideas of like gender, of social media, of how how our bodies are controlled, or how we're, you know, controlling our bodies in certain spaces, things like that. And like and how, sorry, I'm trying to articulate this, but like going from this like very concrete idea in a center and like seeing the wider web that exists, that connects all of these different little areas. That's what really kind of fascinated me about the idea of fashion studies. And I think being in the program gave me a deeper understanding of not only of fashion, of the clothing that's produced, but the social impact, the impact on the world, the impact on actual lives. Of the people that make the clothing, of the people that sell the clothing, of the people that design the clothing, the people that wear them. It's all this big one big interconnected web, and we get to, you know, see what those webs look like and like kind of put up a magnifying glass and see what they're like.
And the history also behind it, right?
Yeah.
Michelle?
The history, what? No. Yeah, I completely agree with all the points that you guys have already pointed out. For me, it came down to, I don't know how to describe it, like understanding what the other programs had to offer and trying to think of what I wanted. So there's the NYU Costume Studies program that, if you want to be super simplistic, to me, it's been interpreted as like the history one. And then there's the FIT program that was known as, or is still known as, the vocational one, right? And that was kind of the research that I had done and the definitions that I had associated with both programs. And then there was the Parsons one that nobody really knew, like what is this thing, you know? And I went for it because of that. Joelle, you beautifully pointed out interdisciplinary. That's what got me, because of what everybody else has been saying. Like, I didn't want to be pigeonholed, because I myself, I know I said I had done some museum work. I had interned at museums, but I also really like reading and writing and watching films and discussing them. And I just didn't want so soon to have to say, I can't do that, or I won't be able to do that. And so that's what initially really kind of brought me to Parsons. I will frankly admit that second week in fashion history, Morano said I was in the wrong program. And that was because she knew how much materiality mattered to me. And I will say that that was something that unfortunately lacked and continues to, you know, be a point of contention, I think, with a lot of costume history or fashion studies programs. And that's just, you know, something that I'm sure is going to be different in the future. But I always think it's interesting that, you know, like 2 weeks in, she was like, you should be somewhere else. And I actually took up the approach that has helped me of, nobody really knows what it is that we graduated in. So it's up to us to defend and promote ourselves. And that's, I mean, it's been pretty successful to me, I wasn't, you know, the classes itself don't prepare you to be a museum professional, but they give you the tools to make those connections and to know the theory and understand, you know, why institutions like museums, why collecting and displaying fashion is important. And I think that was really valuable, because in my career, I've found people be like, what program? What did they teach you? And it's up to me to say, this is what I gained from that, but also say, but I have the hands-on experience outside of school, and outside of you know, the institution of Parsons.
I think there's beauty in that, though. The fact that it is maybe so undefined that we get to define it in the various different ways. Like, all of us in this room right now have a different approach to how we came into the program, what we're going to take out of the program, what we're going to do with it. Like, the fact that this program allows us that flexibility and that freedom to write that ourselves, I think is a really beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, even with everything, it's also, I think, on my side, it's also the development of that critical mind, you know, where you know, when I was writing about fashion before, it was not from a critical, you know, they make you ask the disruptive questions, and the question that not, like, we don't really talk about that. And yes, who made this and who made that and where it came from, but why is that pattern, you know, this is the pattern that they use? Is there, you know, a significance behind it? So I think that's the beauty of it, and being, you know, in that industry. I mean, for me now is also switching between the academic thinking and the entrepreneurial thinking, where, you know, I mean, I still have to run a business, but then there is always a critical mind whenever I choose a collection. Oh, okay, I look at something and I just, you know, I can't just look at it and say, oh, it's pretty. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also what that program helps you. And, you know, without even, I mean, they guide you, but they give you the tools that, as all of you said, to kind of develop that critical mind. Emilia, in your opinion, like, why that one? And would you like to pursue that career in journalism, or would you like to, you know, maybe go do a PhD after that? Or, you know, do you have an idea of you know, what you're gonna, you know, take from that program?
Yeah, so I thank you for kind of outlining that. I do find the PhD track interesting. I think the reason is because of kind of, as Michelle identified, there is you know, a part of me that is very happily, naturally comfortable in research. I would say that my career as a journalist is a bit unusual. You know, no one in my family is a writer. No one in my family is a journalist. And that's not what makes it unusual, but half my family are lawyers and the other half work in intelligence. In fact, we have 4 generations of people working in intelligence. So in the family. So I think that the sort of the work of the journalist in my particular role is that it is research and intelligence gathering in its quickest possible form. So I don't necessarily see the PhD as sort of mutually exclusive to journalism. I think what I've noticed personally is that I'm the type of person who follows my nose. So my research often starts with a topic and starts with characters. And I want to know more about these people. I want to know more about their choices. I want to know more about their motivations and what groups them together or what makes them different. And I have to sort of, in my non-Capricorn head, sort of knock that Capricorn, you know, pattern out of my head. I have to do my research without knowing what the product of that research is going to be. I don't know if it's going to be a class that I'm going to teach. I don't know if it's going to be an outline for a book, if it's going to be a quick article or a quick post where I do a couple interviews, or if it's going to be, you know, the sort of essence for a dissertation. I did get asked in some of the interviews that I did prior to applying whether or not the book that I published in 2017, which was nonfiction, which was about a little bit about the history of the fashion industry, but more so its current interconnected mechanics. and the beauty industry and the magazine industry, whether or not that would have been a basis for a dissertation. And I'm embarrassed to say that I've completely moved on from that particular area of focus. My dissertation would definitely, first off, be centered on the business of the industry, very much so on how the media part of the business is not just telling a story, but actually shaping the story. And I do think that in studying the business, like Anthony was saying, there's a class dynamic that needs to be examined. And I saw this Parsons program as a very safe place to examine a class dynamic like that. And then I was also, struck when, Laura, when you were talking about, the sort of having to look at the economics of fashion and of a point in fashion. And in my particular interest, I think it's fascinating to discuss how aspirational economics has kind of waned and waxed in the fashion industry. Are we wearing fashion because we're aspiring and we want to be something other than ourselves? Or are we wearing fashion because we're actually really articulating more finely and more finely and more finely who we truly are, sort of removing that performative goal? So yeah, I think, all of this falls under the umbrella of ethics. I could see myself pursuing a PhD. I could see myself sort of doing an intensive stay with a company whose particular ethical choices interest me. It's no sort of secret that I research Condé Nast quite a bit. I'm an alum of Georgetown, and Condé Montrose Nast actually went to Georgetown himself. Georgetown, of course, is a Jesuit institution, and so there are ethical questions kind of flying every day. I studied philosophy undergrad, so I'm kind of already geared that way, but I do think, just to kind of not drone on too long, I do think that our ethical questions, what I've noticed is the sustainable fashion movement started us by getting ethical questions into really concrete areas and a really concrete spectrum, from environmental concerns to human rights concerns, and sort of the spectrum in between. And what I find really beautiful about Parsons specifically, not just any academic program where you can kind of tinker and experiment, but Parsons specifically, is that we can ask the question, this is what we are doing, but what should we be doing? And the ability to ask that question, first of all, without it being from McKinsey breathing down your neck. Second of all, asking that question in a scenario where you're not in the bathroom at a company, kind of, what should we be doing in this scenario, kind of scuttling and gossiping. And then sort of lastly, being able to ask that question without any judgment, because I do think that, there's a tough moment in reckoning, and we've seen this in the Black Lives Matter movement, where there needs to be ownership claimed for, and being accountable. And I do think that the fashion industry, has to take ownership and be accountable for mistakes. And I think if we can possibly proceed starting in academic institutions like Parsons to ask the question, not what are we doing, not how could we both be making money, not how could we both be producing the most product, but what should we be doing? If we can ask those questions in a safe space, I really do foresee just a better environment for collaboration and just more diplomacy and respect.
I mean, it makes me think that each fashion design program should have at least one class, kind of like, on the education part of it, like those young fashion designers, they should understand the importance of fashion and the impact of fashion, not only as, as them like a self or like, identity creation, but also as how, other people look at you. And I mean, picking up on that, my follow, like the next question I had for all of you is that how is, fashion study responding actually to the dynamics of the fashion industries and its practices? And when we talk about the fashion industry, we talk about designers, but also, fashion retailers, buyers, merchandiser, who don't have any idea what we study most of the time. Also because, they probably look at the business part of it and how, to produce the most rapidly, what to produce, what to sell, and how to make money, basically. So what, when and talking about what Emilia mentioned with everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter, with race, but also sustainability and other issue of diversity within the fashion industry, how can, us also as fashion studies scholars, researchers, professors, or practitioners, like how does that respond to the dynamic of the fashion industry?
So I'll say that at Parsons, within the undergraduate fashion design program, it is actually required for them now to take 1 semester of intro to fashion studies. And I've had students within the few years that I've been teaching that have taken on minors in fashion studies. And it's really great to see that.
That's wonderful.
That conversation is happening, and that there is a generation of young designers that are coming into the industry with the knowledge that we're gaining, maybe not to the same degree literally that we're getting it to, but that those dialogues are starting. And I think it's also important to see that the dialogues that I have in my classroom with my undergraduate intro to fashion studies students, those dialogues are already happening within the public sphere as well. There are like accounts like Diet Prada, and even just a few years ago, the word sustainability in fashion, it wasn't as widespread as it is today. And like the fact that those dialogues are happening because there are people like us in this room that are helping those conversations happening to get those conversations started. And now there are more designers that are coming out of the Parsons program through the undergraduate level as well as the graduate level, who are able to take those dialogues and actually contribute to those cultural conversations that we're having in a way that are meaningful and actually impactful, rather than a lot of brands who are doing the surface level bare minimum of what they need to do to check off, oh, we did the right thing. But there are people that are able to be like, oh, this is, you might have done that, but look at all these other things that you can do. How do we start having that? How do we start checking off those boxes as well? And so at least from the academic standpoint, I feel like we're doing something good here.
That's great. That's new, or
I think it's, at least as long as I've been at Parsons, that's been a standard. I think they've
that's wonderful.
This course, which is great. Yeah.
One thing that has happened to me that's related to what you were just saying, Anthony, is that many brands have come to me, especially from Colombia, which is, I think, where I have the strongest ties to. But many brands or young designers come to me and they're like, I want to do things right. So from an academic standpoint, what advice do you have? And I've even been able, or I guess had the privilege to even consult for some of these young brands. And I think that's fantastic, because again, I think, well, one of the things, going back to our time in the program, I think one of the things that we discuss the most is this kind of like divorce between the industry and fashion scholars, and that we don't really talk to each other. But then seeing that some designers are starting to ask these questions, and that they realize that they might not have all of the answers, but that there are people that they can come to, and we can work together to try to figure out how these answers look like, not in theory and not in books, but in actual design practice, I think is something beautiful. And I hope that as we become more visible, and as there are more and more of us, not just graduates of the Parsons masters, but other related programs that also have this focus on what we now call fashion studies, I think that this is going to help the industry, or I hope, and I hope I'm not being too dreamy here, but I hope that that's also going to help shape the industry for the future and hopefully transform it in a positive way.
If I can also just add to that, I think that right now, this with COVID and quarantine and the way that the economy is acting right now, I feel like there's a really unique opportunity for emerging fashion studies scholars to really step in and fill these roles that I think a lot of fashion companies have been looking for people to step in and step into those shoes. And I think that there's an opportunity for the fashion industry to kind of grow and expand in ways that we've like always dreamed of within our field. And for me, it's more exciting to see what's going to happen. It's scary, but it's also exciting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the last point that you made, Anthony, because when I normally would be giving a tour to students or the public, whenever I had students, I would tell them like what an exciting time that they're currently living in, especially if they were like undergraduates, because of the power that they have. And I like really emphasize that they should feel empowered, because I think back now, I said this yesterday, we started our program 6 years ago, which is like mind blowing. And the buzzword was the mediation of fashion, right? And Instagram was like, it was a thing, you know, it was the thing. But now I feel like it's completely transformed what the industry is even more. And so I really emphasize to the students, like, you liking and you sharing and you know, that's all monetized. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you are a consumer of fashion, whether you're a couture client or not. And I just find that really, like, when I see their kind of like the wheels turning, whether they're in fashion design or whether they're in marketing, or I sometimes get like English literature classes, just so that they know that they're not powerless in this. I think that's like, and things like Diet Prada, you know, who everybody has their biases, nobody is, you know, guilt-free, but the fact that there are platforms now that exist that within 24 hours, there is accountability, right? Even if it is, you know, spilling the tea and some receipts, it's so much more than what we've had ever before, right? And there's pros and cons to that, right? There's like radical over exaggerations, and then there's also like these acknowledgements of fault, you know, decade-long history. And then the other thing I wanted to add is the exciting part. I also emphasize to students that, like, you don't know what position will become available, because my current position now is a perfect example, time to talk about it. I actually started undergrad as an early childhood education teacher. I don't know if you guys knew that.
No.
Yeah, I was going to be a bilingual pre-K to first grade teacher. But I always loved fashion. And so I'm like, what do I do with these? You know, I love school and I love history and I love fashion, and what do I do? And now I'm the collections and education assistant on the curatorial team for a museum that's part of a university. Like, I got goosebumps. You know, and mine, this is the only position that exists in that like hybrid manner yet, right? And it just so happens I was at the right place at the right time, and my skills are being used in those ways. But I try and encourage students, especially talking about sustainability. I just had a little Zoom class with a high school class the other day, and I talked about, you don't know what designers are going to need sourced. You know, maybe they want you to be a picker at a thrift store. I'm going to do this entire collection made of secondhand silk. You know, find it for me in pink or whatever. And I started to see them being like, wow, that'd be really cool. You know, like you said, Anthony, like, now is the time to start thinking outside the box, because if we've seen anything in the last, I don't know, I wouldn't even say a decade, like 5 years, is that things are moving really quickly. It's unfortunate that it's taken the measures that it's taken, the current cultural climate, but I am also very encouraged for what's to come, because I think there's no more excuses now to turn a blind eye. Like, it's just, there's no way to deny kind of the what is it? The lack of accountability, the inappropriate practices that have been just dismissed out of this aura of the media, right? Of the image of fashion. Who cares what it took for this magazine ad to look this way? Because isn't it aesthetically beautiful? And now we're like, actually, we don't find that beautiful anymore.
But don't you think also, Michelle, that the kind of like spread of fashion exhibitions also helped? You know, I mean, I remember, I don't know, I'm a bit older, 12 years ago, you know, I would go to Paris and to Le Grand Palais to see an exhibition on Bourdin, on fashion photography. Now you have to queue, well, not now, but with COVID,
Yeah.
but you know, the past 5, 4, and even living in New York, you see how people are much more interested by just, you know, going, and I'm sure it's not only on the superficial side just to look at a beautiful dress, is to learn, as you know, maybe a fashion designer wants to learn more, like you talked about the picker. Those guys are coming back.
Oh, yeah.
I actually know 2 of them, and it's amazing. And some of them used to work in Italy. They're again also old generation, and they were telling me that now with the internet, their job was kind of like with the internet coming, their job was fading away because anyone could go online and print a dress or something. And he showed me his collection. I mean, I was just like, you know, I got goosebumps when I saw the collection. And he's like, now more and more brands are asking me to go and pick. And they want to know the story. They want to know how it was made. They want to know, to look at the stitches. They want to know in what context it was worn, because again, that's a huge thing that, you know, now more and more people have to understand. So I agree. I think also, I think that the business and the academia are coming slowly together. And I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to do a little bit. And I think, I mean, I'm seeing changes too. Um, and, you know, to be able to see the importance of what we do, and to see that people are understanding that importance, you know, more of us.
I'm kind of curious for the graduates to know, like, when you graduated, did you guys run into situations where people would maybe kind of laugh or belittle the notion of getting a master's and sort of staying in academics longer? And the reason I ask that is because there have been small moments that I've encountered where people think that, you know, like, oh, well, your experience is in this program. Well, academia is a bubble and the classroom is hypothetical and it's not actually real world experience. Laura, I know you mentioned that you have actually been a consultant. I've been a consultant. But I will say that I'm curious to know, you know, if you've ever kind of been confronted with this notion of, well, what's the value of, you know, practicing these things in the classroom when it's not the real world? And, you know, if not kind of having to, I forget who said this in the beginning of the call, but having to explain, you know, what the program is and like justify, Michelle, I think it was you actually that said that, not just kind of explaining what the program is, but really defending and justifying the entire exercise of being in a research sort of academic mode. Do you embrace that claim that you're in a bubble? Because I think now, you know, we're working from home. A lot of people are working from home, and you know, do you sometimes turn that accusation of the bubble on its head and say, well, actually, you know, when you get a little space from things, you can see things clearly? I'm just curious, you know, if you guys have ever encountered that and how you've mitigated it.
I guess I can speak specifically to it. So, you know, in the museum field, it's a generalization, but without an MA, you basically have no chance at getting a job, right? And then that's where I went with, like, I think that's what Marana was getting at when she was like, you're in the wrong program, because nobody up until that point had graduated from the program with the full-on intention of working hands-on with a collection at a museum. Now, I got hired at the Costume Institute in essentially my dream job with technically just a BA, right? And I wasn't the only one. Thanks, Joel. And I wasn't the only one. I had my peers who were at NYU and others at FIT. And I think it was an interesting conundrum for us because we were all in the same kind of, like, we had one semester left. We had to finish our thesis. Some of them did it while working full time. I'm glad I chose to pause mine. But then you end up asking yourself, what's the validity of that, right? In the sense, if you're just going to be a hands-on, you know, kind of professional. So for me, I'm glad that I had the interaction of both, because I continue to practice in a very interdisciplinary way. And I think it would be impossible to simply call fashion studies an academic field, because it is inherently interdisciplinary. Like, if you get thrown that at you, I would just say, well, it actually relates to all of these, you know, disciplines. So if you want to pigeonhole it, fine, but it's so much more. It's, you know, it's industry, it's sociology, it's history, it's preservation, it's racism, right? I mean, it's so many things. It's architecture. But yeah, the MA, wondering about why did I even bother with the MA when it was the hands-on experience that got me the position that I did, and that continued to get me the experiences that I got afterwards. The MA was just kind of a necessary thing to have, but it was never really kind of worried about or discussed or talked about, at least in my experiences.
I don't think I've actually ever faced that sort of belittling of academia. I mean, I think there is definitely that sense that academia is a bubble and it's its own world. And in many ways, I think it is. But in many ways, it isn't, because again, even as I study historical periods, I can always kind of trace the connections between history and present and how that interacts with fashion today, and how that also informs the way in which fashion can be better, or how it can change. And I don't know if it's maybe because I'm super vocal about it and people kind of like don't like assign me to this like little office in which I just write and think about history, but I'm involved with the current situation and with the fashion world now. So I don't know if it's that, but I don't think I have received any comments about academia being this like weird separate space. The one thing that I do receive a lot, and it goes back to this question that we've mentioned more than once, that what is fashion studies? I think people are very confused about getting a PhD in fashion, and they're like, oh, so you're going to become a fabulous designer after you finish your PhD. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure if someone who wants to become a really good designer should get a PhD to begin with, because it's just a completely different exercise. And so I think people kind of don't connect the whole PhD with fashion. But I'm certainly not the first one doing it. So it is a thing, and it's possible, and I think this is all to say that it just confuses people. But then again, as more of us go through these paths with or without PhD, I think it's going to become more easy to understand for people.
I think it has become already. I mean, me being in DC, I mean, you know, Emilia, it was a bit complicated for people to understand, but then you show them, basically. That's what we did. We literally showed them. We did a small exhibition. They were like, why are you asking those questions? Who cares? And I was like, well, people care, you know, I mean, there are people, and I literally got that. But Joelle, we don't care about what the white shirts means. And I was like, well, read, and then you'll understand. And then they came, they read, and they loved it, basically. And they were like, we never saw it. It would, you know, we never looked at it this way. And I'm just like, well, open your closet, and, you know, we can talk for hours about what you have in your closet and why you have it and why you're wearing this. And so that's my personal experience with DC, which at the beginning I found very hard. And that's why I went with a textile museum. But even with a textile museum, coming from Parsons was not at all, you know, usually they hire from Yale or Harvard, MA in art history. I was the one that was coming with a fashion studies MA, and they were like, yeah, well, does she understand textiles? Does she understand history of textile? Does she? And I mean, they hired me for a specific thing. And I was like, well, you need me for that. I don't need to, you know, talk about Byzantine textile. I'm not a specialist of the Byzantine textile, but, you know, we can. So I think it's changing. And I think once they listen to you and they see what you can do and why you're doing it, and for, you know, it starts making more sense. I mean, I guess that's from my point of view.
Yeah, can I say something quickly now that you mentioned DC? I also think, well, I don't live in DC, but I'm not very far away, so I've been able to go more often in the past few years. And one thing that really surprised me, but then also showed this big interest in fashion, is that I think last year, it must have been exactly around a year ago, I was in DC for 2 weeks for a summer program that I was teaching at, and we went to the Freer-Sackler Gallery, and they had a beautiful exhibition on animals in Asian art. And the last gallery in the exhibition was actually on fashion, which to me was super surprising because I was not expecting it. And then again, like the Freer-Sackler is a very, I guess, sort of on the more traditional side of art gallery, and they put up fantastic exhibitions. But again, I was not expecting to see a gallery in fashion, especially also because it's DC. And it's one thing, and you mentioned this earlier, Joel, it's one thing to see fashion exhibitions in a city like New York or in Paris, and it's a different thing to see fashion exhibitions or exhibitions with a gallery on fashion in other places. So I think even that, to me, that they put the effort to create this display of fashion within this major Asian art exhibition shows that there is certainly a growing interest even in DC in fashion and fashion history and fashion curating.
I think there's also this moment where when someone's, giving us these questions about our field, you kind of just want to be like, everyone wears clothes. This isn't something that is only for us. Like, you get dressed every morning. You're going through the process, and it's not a random process. You're not just blindly like grabbing something and putting it on. You're making a decision, and your decisions are informed by so much more than just the money you have and what race you are. It's also defined by where you live. It's defined by your gender identity. It's defined by so many of these different forces. And I think that people who maybe are removed from thinking about clothing in this way, it helps to just like reiterate to them that, oh, you wear clothes. Like, this is something that you participate in as well. Maybe not in the same direct way that we do it, but what we're doing is taking that action, taking that daily dress practice and putting a magnifying glass up to it and saying, how can we extrapolate information from that?
I love what you said about the Smithsonian, because I was born and raised here, and when I was little, it was like, we can go to the mall, the National Mall, if we go to the First Lady's gown exhibition in the American, History Museum. And actually, Laura, we'll have to chat about this later. I was visiting with the Guatemalan embassy on a project, and they said, have you ever seen our, antique textiles? And I was like, in fact, no, I have not. And they said they were in the archive at the Smithsonian, just beautiful textiles from Guatemala that, haven't had a chance to be examined yet. And now I know that you're the girl they have to call, so I'll just write that down. But, but yeah, I definitely, I also find it incredibly inspiring when fashion, beauty, hair, accessories, jewelry is worked in with other exhibits. I also remember going, Joelle, to the Textile Museum for the first time and actually thinking it was going to be all fashion. I was wrong about that. Yeah. But I really appreciated that they had, a rug that went over, a wagon and that had the stories of the families in it, juxtaposed to the coat that people wrote their family stories in. And, I thought that was really important, to be able to, Anthony, exactly how you said, it's something that everyone is making a decision about. And I do appreciate, and I think this is probably already evidenced in this video, just the magnifying glass and just the nerdiness that is the freedom that is allowed in that magnifying glass and in that examination. Because I think at some point there is maybe still, for some reason, this posture in fashion sometimes that gets really formal. It's kind of a cool, sort of a cool demeanor. And it's kind of, this notion, this Anna Wintour notion, if you're not going to be better, then dress better. And I do think that it's important to kind of recognize that, these decisions about what we're wearing are, anyone can examine them, anyone can understand them better. No one is above understanding and study in this sort of collective conversation.
Wonderful. All right, guys. I think yeah, we've talked about everything that we wanted to talk. I mean, I wanted also to end on that, like, it's also very complicated, that whole notion of fashion, because of the definition itself can be a bit confusing sometimes. But that's for another talk, I think. But yeah, on that point, I would like to thank you all for that amazing conversation. I was so happy to see your faces too. We usually do that on the phone, so it's nice to do it on the Zoom call and be able to talk to each other. Yeah, I hope we inspired you more, Emilia.
I'm very inspired. I honestly I've been my journalist. I've been taking notes for questions for everyone later on. And I will also just mention that the good chat is so important. And the first episode was really, really special. I haven't finished all of it, but it was really excellent. And I maybe if you want to start the evil chat sometime, we can figure out, a villain and a hero to kind of.
I like that idea. The evil side versus the good side. That would be nice. Well, that video will be also available on YouTube. The first one was on fashion and race, with only DC people working in the fashion industry mostly. It was very. I had a lot of goosebumps, let's say, during that talk. But I love that one too. And again, thank you. Thank you for joining. And I value all of your like everything that you said. And thank you for being here. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you all soon.
Yes.
No,
Yeah,
I don't know.
for gathering us. This was really enjoyable.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, as Anthony said, for putting us in the same room. I miss this.